it's not about what I think. Politics is about what the public thinks. There's an unfortunate tendency in the Israel-Palestine conflict that whenever you get into a discussion about it, the first question that comes up is, do you support one state or two states? As if politics were a Chinese menu. I'll take one from column A, I'll take two from column B. That's not politics. Politics is about where the public consciousness is, not your own. And at the risk of sounding brash, I would also say politics is not about personal morality. It's not about personal morality. It's not about your morality or my morality. Gandhi, for example, he lived two lives. The life that most of you know is as a leader of the Indian independence movement to end the British occupation. But he had a second life. The second life was as the leader of an ashram. An ashram is like a cult. And Gandhi was a very strict taskmaster in that ashram. If you want to be in my ashram, Mr. Gandhi said, no meat, because we're vegetarians. No sex, because we're brahmacharis. No wristwatches, no idle jokes, no reading in the toilet, no underwear. It was very tough. But Gandhi recognized there's a difference between personal morality, that is to say, the morality of an ashram, and political morality, that is to say, the morality of politics. And they're not the same. If he tried to impose his personal morality in the political sphere, as in, if you want to join the Indian Congress Party to fight for Indian independence, you're not allowed to wear underwear. Well, obviously the total number of recruits could fit in this room. That's not politics. To take the example I gave you, let us say if the people in the first row, instead of demanding that people give up their spare coat, they demanded that people give up for the homeless their spare room. Now, I have to say, in speaking strictly for myself, I've wrestled with that question a lot. And I know morally, I should give up that room. I have space in my apartment. Not a lot, but certainly the living room can accommodate another body, that's for sure. And I know morally that's the right thing to do. If you ask the proverbial question, what would Jesus do? Well, Jesus, I think, would give up that room. But, speaking frankly, I'm not ready to do it. I'm not. Maybe my ego is too large or my selfishness is too large, but I won't do it. Now, I say that at the same time as I acknowledge that were they to make that demand, they would have morality on their side. Which is why I say politics is not about morality. Because I think they have the better moral argument. But I'm not ready to do it. And if you make that sort of demand, I think you'll lose the public. You can win them with the coat, your spare coat, Because most people recognize, yeah, there's something really wrong about me just keeping that coat in the closet and not doing anything with it, when there are so many people without even blankets. But most people, their morality is not. We're willing to give up our spare room. So if I were to ask this audience now, if there were nonviolent civil disobedience to give up the extra coat in your closet that you're not using, how many of you would do it? Raise your hand. If I asked you to give up the spare room in your apartment, how many of you would do it? One. And that's politics. So it's not, in my opinion, about your personal political opinion. It's not about your personal morality. It's about where the broad public is. And with that as the foundation, we can now go fairly expeditiously and fairly easily to the next question, the question of the evening. How do you solve the conflict? Because I think the answer is completely clear, unambiguous. Namely, if you look at the most representative political institutions in the world today, or if you look at the extreme of the mainstream spectrum, namely the most enlightened mainstream institutions in the world, the most representative, and at the extreme end of the spectrum, the most enlightened, you come to the same conclusion. The only resolution of the conflict that has resonance with a broad public in the world today is a full Israeli withdrawal from the territories it occupied in June 1967, the right of the Palestinians to exist. Look at the UN General Assembly vote, the most representative body in the world today. There's obviously an overwhelming consensus for resolving the conflict along the lines I just suggested, and the only obstruction, the only obstacle is Israel backed by the United States. If you leave aside those South Sea islands, the combined populations of which can fit in the seats of the two people who just left the room. If you look at the regional organizations, the major regional organization of the Arabs, namely the Arab League, they put forth what's called the Arab Peace Initiative, calling for 2 states in the June 67 border, with a just resolution of the refugee question. The vote in the Arab League consists or is comprised of 22 countries. The vote was 22-0. If you look at the major Muslim organization in the world, it's called the Organization of the Islamic Conference. It consists of 57 officially Islamic countries in the world. All 57 to 0, support the 2-state settlement on the June 67 border. Incidentally, when I say all 57, I'm including the Islamic Republic of Iran, which both in the OIC and in the General Assembly since 2003 has gone with the overwhelming sentiment of humankind supporting the 2-state settlement in the June 67 border. If one looks at the factual record as against the media and hysteria in the public arena, the only obstacle to resolving the conflict is Israel backed by the U.S., not Iran. If you move from the most representative political body in the world to the most respected legal body in the world, the most respected legal body. Anyone here want to venture what is the most respected legal body in the world today? I hear people whispering it. Yes.
The ICC?
Well, no, I would say the International Criminal Court, I would not say that's, first of all, the ICC doesn't deserve any respect. It operates under this strange notion that war criminals only come from Africa. What's the most respected legal body in the world today? Yeah, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. The ICC is just a plaything of the Americans and the Europeans, where they get to pretend that they're civilized. The most respected legal body in the world today is the International Court of Justice, sometimes in the shorthand known as the World Court. And in 2004, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, it rendered what's called an advisory opinion on the wall that Israel has been building in the occupied Palestinian territory of the West Bank. And in the course of its adjudication of the legality of the wall, the court did render opinions on some of the major issues bearing on the Israel-Palestine conflict. So, for example, they said, number one, under international law, a basic principle, the fancy legal term is a peremptory norm. A basic principle of international law is that it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war. Israel acquired the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem in the course of a war, and therefore Israel has no title to any of the West Bank, any of Gaza, or any of East Jerusalem. The ICJ, the International Court, denoted those areas, quote, occupied Palestinian territory, full stop. Number two, the court said under international law, it's illegal to transfer your population for an occupying power to transfer its population to occupied territory. And therefore the court ruled that Israeli settlements and settlers in the occupied West Bank, they were all illegal under international law. So on the question of settlements, Jerusalem, and borders, the court ruled, and I should note, and it's important to bear in mind, all 15 judges, not a minority, not a plurality, not a majority, all 15 judges ruled Israel has no title to any of the West Bank or Gaza. East Jerusalem is occupied Palestinian territory. All of the settlements are illegal under international law. Because they were